So I want to thank everybody for coming here today to mark the shlomshim of my father, Gersh Sone, zichrono livracha. And I can't think of a better way to honor my dad than to pair this evening with the launch of Rav Yitz's new book, A Triumph of Life. My father's spiritual mentor was my childhood rabbi, Rav Avraham Heschel Feder, zichrono livracha, who I believe you knew. The two of you share a remarkably similar Torah, a Torah that at its core is based on a philosophy that B'Tselem Elohim bara oto zachar v'nekeva bara otam. Not in the passive, descriptive sense that man and women are made in God's image, but in the call to action sense that because we are each made in God's image, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to repair what is broken in our world, and there is so much that is broken. My dad lived his life as a bridge between the values of the old world Jew and the new world Jew. Born in 1935 in Toronto to Russian-Romanian parents, his mother tongue was Yiddish, and he only began speaking English at the age of 6. He grew up with no material luxuries, but there was abundant joy, friends, and laughter in his home, along with a healthy dose of my booby's Transylvanian superstitions. He grew up in an environment that treasured education and embodied hard work. But there was also lots of warmth and humor. Formally, he was Gerald, but to everyone who knew him, he was Gersh. The first in his family to go to university, he graduated with a degree in pharmacy from the University of Toronto and went on to found and build a chain of retail pharmacies and a wholesale pharmacy business, being the first to introduce computerized ordering and inventory systems to the trade. As I began my own career in the healthcare field, I was fortunate to meet many people who knew my dad professionally, and they always had the exact same thing to say about him. Gersh Sone, what a mensch, a man of pure truth and honesty. In fact, Shauna's dad, who was also a pharmacist, was overjoyed to learn that his baby daughter was dating Gersh's son, as they had known each other years before we were even born, and also because he knew he would have a long-standing and loyal customer to whom he could sell the generic medicines he manufactured. There were 4 things that my dad cared about in his life: family, Israel, Judaism, and pharmacy. Baseball was a close 5th. As an aside, my dad picked up his love for baseball when in high school he worked as a popcorn usher in the days when Toronto had a AAA baseball team. A southpaw, he loved going to games with us and would relish telling us what was going to take place on the next play. He's going to throw the curve, watch for the steal on the next pitch, the bunt is coming. He was pretty much right every time, something he could have used to his financial benefit if he had taken a trip to Vegas. My dad modeled what true partnership in marriage looks like. Married for over 65 years, my parents cultivated many common interests together, and he always ensured that my mom was the priority in his life. My dad liked to say that he and my mom were the movers and shakers. When my mom moved, he shook. Despite having a busy professional life, he was an equal partner in raising my siblings and me. Married in 1958 at the age of 19, my mom never had an opportunity to go to university before having children. So my dad made it a priority to redouble his parenting efforts over the course of many years so that my mom could go get her undergrad and then master's degree in her 40s, during the busy years. He was always home for dinner, played baseball and hockey with us multiple times a week, took us to the symphony every other week, the theater, and of course, one-on-one Torah study every Shabbat. He was the president of our shul of over 800 families, served on every committee possible, which was probably the main reason he was bald by the age of 40. My dad was living proof to the adage that the busiest people get the most done. He surrounded himself with friends, music, and humor to bring joy into each of the cornerstones of his life, always with a big smile. My dad was a big picture Jew. He loved Jewish ritual and music, but what moved him were the big arcs and intentions of Judaism: kindness, sensitivity to the other, justice, tzedakah, and Israel. Ritual was hollow without intention and human sensitivity. These are the themes that Rav Yitz talks about so eloquently in his magnum opus, which we will hear more about tonight. My father loved to study Tanakh with my siblings and me, and when I think about the pasuk that embodies him, it would be from Micha, Perak Vav, pasuk Chet. Heged lecha ma tov uma Adonai doresh mimcha, ki im asot mishpat v'avat chesed v'atznei lechet im Elohecha. You have been told, O man, what is good and what God wants of you, to do justice and to love goodness and to walk modestly with your God. A turbocharged Zionist, my dad fulfilled his lifelong dream to live in Israel, if only for a year at the age of 49, where he began to learn modern Hebrew. He cultivated many interests and was a lifelong learner. He took up guitar in middle age, became a swimmer, and learned Talmud every week. He loved the symphony, jazz, and much to my bewilderment, the ballet. But most of all, his life was a journey in becoming a joyous and serious Jew. He understood that the beauty of Judaism was to be found in making it relevant to the complexities and nuances of the modern age. At the same time, he also knew that modernity, whether in Canada, the US, or Israel, and maybe especially in Israel, made it all too easy to dilute Judaism down to trite cultural and superficial associations, which he saw as belittling and trivializing. So he defined the course of his life around being joyous and serious about his Judaism, as one would be with anything that they were passionate about. He worked at it, he brought it to life, studied it, found joy in it, absorbed himself in it, and shared it with us. He was, and he continues to be, my lodestar. I want to thank everyone for coming out here tonight in a tribute to my father. While it was important for me to sit Shiva with my mom and siblings back in the old country, I miss the warmth and caring of this community that Shauna and I and our boys are blessed to be a part of, and I'm happy to be back home. My dad was blessed to create his own community of close friends, and he would marvel at the chesed that everyone in this room practices, to live up to the call to action of B'Tselem Elohim. And it's in this spirit, it's my honor to hand things over to David, who will introduce his dad.
Todd asked me to say a few words in introduction to my father. Actually, I think the most salient fact, of course, about him is his wonderful grandchildren, and some of whom are here tonight, and great-grandchildren. Ella, where are you? Yeah. Actually, no, I think perhaps his greatest triumph is, of course, the triumphant love of his life, his wife, Rabbi Greenberg, who's also here with us tonight. My mother, the original Orthodox Jewish feminist and founder of JOFA, coiner of the phrase, where there is a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. I'm good. I'm good. And now the co-founder and leader of the International Beit Din, which is championing the fight for halachic solutions, which will... Oh, thank you. I'm not going to need that. Halachic solutions which will do away with the scourge of igun. So, thank you for being here, Ima. My father actually does need no introduction, but I guess for those of you who are a little less familiar with his history, I'll just take a few minutes. My father was born in 1933 to immigrant parents who left Europe basically in the aftermath of World War I and came to America looking for a better future. He grew up a good Jewish boy in Brooklyn. He went to the BTA, yeah? And studied in Beis Yosef, which was a sort of very European outpost of the Novardok Musar Yeshiva. While he was doing that, he attended Brooklyn College and afterwards Harvard University, where his, let's call it, slightly insular orthodoxy met up with the challenge of modern society and modern cultural and intellectual challenges to that. It was very much, I think Todd talked about how his father was, about making Judaism relevant in that modern society, and that certainly was something which was formative for my father. He subsequently was the rabbi of the Young Israel Brookline, ran what was the precursor to the Hillel organization in Brandeis University. He became he was a professor of American history and Jewish thought in Yeshiva University. He then founded the Jewish Studies Department in City College of New York, which was in the foment of the 1970s. He spent a year before that studying the Holocaust at Yad Vashem, and I think that spent the rest of his life formulating and figuring out the implications of the Holocaust on a theological and philosophical level. He was a major voice in Jewish-Christian dialogue. He then focused much of his energy on the lay leadership of the non-Orthodox Jewish communities in the United States through Klal and other organizations. He chaired the commission which created the U.S. Holocaust Museum together with Elie Wiesel. He was one of the architects of, along with my brother JJ, the creation of Birthright, which has done so much wonderful things for Israel and for the diaspora. He has written extensively, many books, although probably not as many as he should have. But anyway, we can discuss that later, including The Jewish Way, For the Sake of Heaven and Earth, Sage Advice, and more recently, Or Yisrael, which is a translation of the letters of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and I think bringing the Musar movement and the thought of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter to a modern audience with a modern interpretation. And he has spent the last 10 years of his life, at least, and probably all of his life, working on The Triumph of Life, his magnum opus, which has now achieved its fruition here. So I want to thank Shauna and Todd for inviting my father here to introduce this work within this beloved community, which I know means so much to me and to my parents and my family, and of course to you guys. And to have it on the occasion of the commemoration of your father's shlomshim, and thank you for sharing those words with us. And I think being with you together in Toronto and hearing about your father, I wish I had gotten more of an opportunity to know him better. I think we're living at a time where it's all too easy to look at the disruption, the challenges, and the tragedies which we all encounter as individuals, as a community, as a country, and as a world, and to lose hope in some ways for life. And I think it's really wonderful for me and for my whole family, and I'm glad that I can share this with you tonight, to be inspired by somebody who, at the age of 91, who's witnessed the arc of so much history, the challenges, the wonderful things as well, but the challenges, and who continues to believe so fervently that the response to an imperfect world is not to give up, but to actually persevere towards the triumph of life. And so I will offer my father the floor and ask him to share some thoughts from his latest work.
David tried to sound me out what I wanted him to say in the introduction, and everything he said is his responsibility. I didn't say that. I said, but if you heard that introduction, you realize what I said to him was correct. He said, what should I say? But I should say that I am married to Blue Greenberg, who not only changed my life, but changed the Jewish life, for women particularly, enriched it. Secondly, you've met my amazing children, and some of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I really do consider that the most remarkable achievement of my life, and I hope that was a living proof of that. I want to start by thanking Todd and Shauna for hosting this launch. I did work on the book for a long time, and you may not think so, but the truth is, in the end, a sense that there are people who believe in it, or who respect it, or who care about it, really means a lot to you, not only after you've written it, but while you're writing it. So I really feel surrounded by love and appreciation and support, including the audience, and so I thank you all for that too. And I am particularly grateful. Well, actually, one word of business or housekeeping, which is I did sign in advance the list that was on the list of those coming, so I could individualize them. But I looked around and I saw there were some people who weren't on the list, so please stay afterward and give me a chance to inscribe your personal one as well. I was going to say I would particularly appreciate a chance to have this evening on the occasion of a shlomshim, a yortzeit. One of the main claims in the book is that Jewish people and Jewish religion, really, it's a multi-generational covenantal community, meaning it's a community that has a commitment and a purpose. Covenant is a partnership that one enters into out of love, out of commitment. That is to say, when you take love and turn it into commitment, that's what a covenant is. And covenant commitment of the Jewish people is, I'll come back to that, to repair the world, to really, in the words of the Torah, to turn this earth into a Gan Eden, into a paradise. That's really the dream and the vision of the Jewish people. But it can't be done in one lifetime. Obviously not. And so the answer is, what's the point of starting if you're never going to finish? And of course the Jewish answer was, no, you create a covenantal community, family. And so you take it, each generation takes it as far as they can do it, improves it as much as they can. And then that's the key. If you can recruit your children and the next generation to carry on. And so you carry on until you'll finally get there. And of course, it's almost 3,500 years we're doing this, but it's particularly meaningful to know about your father and about how he has passed it on, and really that's the dream of all of us, to pass it on to those who will not only live up to it and carry it and improve it, but also pass it on. Okay, so what can I do about this thing? So I'd like to split into two pieces. One is, I'd like to give what I consider 5 highlights of the book. And the truth is, I could have picked 15 other alternative highlights, but it's meant to be a sampling. And secondly, I was hoping that, since you haven't had a chance to read it yet, nevertheless, I was hoping, A, that you'd respond with your own comments or questions, so we can split the evening in that way. Because the book is not just an attempt to offer a particular theology, it's also an attempt to offer a vision of what kind of religion Jews should be practicing in our lifetime and doing in this lifetime, and the questions and the challenges and the problems of doing that. So I would welcome your comments and your challenges and your questions as well as mine. What are the 5 highlights I'd like to cite for you? Well, one is, thank you, Todd. Chapter 2 of the book is Tselem Elohim, about the image of God. And as I didn't say this, but as I said it in the Talmud, this is the fundamental principle, the klal gadol of the whole Torah. That is to say, it's not only the basic principle, but also all the mitzvot and all the traditions and all the structures, and somehow are derived from or draw their strength from this particular principle. In this chapter, actually it's probably the oldest teaching of mine in the book. I published a piece of it in 1968, but some years ago I met a student from YU who said to me he heard me talk about it in 1962. So it was pretty early in my career, and I still consider it the most important idea I ever had or taught. And so I always tell my students, if you forget everything else you learn from me, but you remember this, I will be content. So in that chapter, this is the most fundamental, it's not only part of the chapter, but that it's the basic principle, but based on the Mishnah in Sanhedrin in the Talmud. The Talmud tells us, before witnesses were allowed to witness in a death penalty case, capital punishment case, they had to go through a ritual. And the ritual basically explained to them what is it, Tselem Elohim, what's an image of God, so that they should understand that it's not enough to take an oath to tell the truth. They have to really understand what a human life is worth, because on their words, a life may be saved or a life may be taken. And the Mishnah basically comes up with 3, what I call fundamental dignities. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all human beings are created in the image of God, and they are endowed by, they're created with 3 fundamental dignities. Infinite value. Every human life has unlimited value. Another way of putting that is, there's no amount of money that's too much to spend on saving your life. Nobody's life should ever be reduced. Nobody's medical needs should ever be missed because they don't have enough money. Because in principle, there's no amount of limit, and no money will be accepted in replacement for human life. Infinite value. This is the source of the famous line, if you save one life, it's like saving a whole world. If you look at that Mishnah, my argument is, what they meant is the whole world. After all, how can one life be equal to 8 billion lives? The answer is, each life is infinitely valuable. So if you save one life, you've saved infinity. And if you save 8 billion lives, you've saved infinity. So anyway, infinite value is the first dignity. And every person you should feel they have that. Secondly, equality. There is no preferred image of God. God is neither male nor female. God is neither white nor black, nor yellow, nor any other race. God is not Jew or Gentile. In short, any claim that a particular version, say that males are superior, or that a particular religion or a particular people or a particular gender is superior, is a form of idolatry, because you're saying that this image of God is the true, correct one or the superior one. The main claim of the tradition is that there is no image of God that truly represents it, but every image that is out there is equal. The third dignity of every human being in the image of God is, of course, uniqueness. There's literally nobody else like you ever in this world. So even identical twins are not identical. And if you were their mother and you loved them, you would have noticed that the other twin has a little mole behind his left ear, or whatever. The point is, that is the mark of an image created by God. A human image is the same. One mole comes out, and this is the Mishnah's language, one mole comes out, every stamp, every coin is exactly the same. But God created one mole, Adam and Eve, and yet each one is unique and different. Now, what I say about Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, is how do you create a world in which literally people are treated that way? We live in a world now where 1 million children, 500,000 children died last year of malaria in Africa because they couldn't afford mosquito netting, where millions of children die every year from dehydration and diarrhea, and game of various illnesses, and yet they could have been kept alive if they had clean water and oral rehydration tablets, which cost roughly 25 cents a day. So again, you're living in a world where millions die for lack of 25 cents a day and for organization. So that's the measure of Yahadut, of the world, how much we have to go until we get to a world that's truly the world that God would like it to be, a Gan Eden, where human life is treated as of infinite value, equality, uniqueness. The second highlight of the book, I feel, is my claim, at least, that Judaism is a religion of Tikkun Olam. By Tikkun Olam, of course, again, it's almost a standard Orthodox trope now to make fun of liberal Jews by saying, well, they're Tikkun Olam, that's because they're busy saving the world and they don't care about Judaism. Well, my argument is it's exactly about Tikkun Olam, because if you look at Jewish messianism, which I feel is the key contribution after the teaching about God, is the Jewish teaching about messianism, meaning the claim that this world can and should be perfected, that you shouldn't accept the status quo, no matter how it is, and even if you're well off, you should not accept the status quo. You should not settle until the world is completely transformed and redeemed. So that's why I call Tikkun Olam. According to the Nevi'im, in order to get to that world, we'll have to overcome poverty. So businessmen have a very serious, or other economists have a very serious potential to contribute to Tikkun Olam. You have to overcome hunger. According to Yeshayahu, you have to overcome discrimination and all forms of inequality. The characteristic of the Messiah is that the Messiah will rule, even the poor will get equal justice with the rich. There will be no more superior advantages, whether it be in legal or class terms or in representational legal terms. So we're going to overcome inequality and discrimination. We're going to overcome war, as you all know, the UN building has on it. They'll beat their swords into plowshares and they shall not learn war anymore. We'll overcome sickness. Again, Yeshayahu talks about in the Messianic end days, the deaf will hear, the blind will see. So I'd like to add, obviously, the dementia will recover their memory, cancer will be cured. That's exactly the claim. Now again, all it means is we've got a long way to go, but having said that, it also means that if you're a doctor, or if you're a lawyer who can bring justice and fair treatment into if you're a social worker, I don't have to go through the whole list, that have a major contribution to make to Tikkun Olam. And in fact, the religious calling is therefore not for rabbis or for Nevi'im or for priests. It's really for the people who understand this and want to carry it out. So that's the claim we make. And when I say the Messianic claim, again, I want to be honest, this is a long and very complex tradition. And there are people who say everything I said about image of God and everything I said about transforming the world, it's about Jews. In fact, if you look at the standard edition of the Talmud that we use today, which is based on the Rum edition of Vilna, the 19th century, it says if you save one Jewish life, it's like saving a whole world. So again, I don't deny there is this whole part of the tradition. We have very strong representation in this lifetime of Jews who feel exactly that way, that Jewish life is worth everything, but otherwise worth nothing. But all I'm saying is, it's not, I think, the correct representation of the tradition, and very simply, Adam was not Jewish. This will be a shock to all of you. Eve was not Jewish. It's very clear. It's very clear, and of course, long before I said it, Rav Kook pointed it out, Rav Soloveitchik pointed it out, but I stand behind the Torah's statement that man and woman were created in the image of God, and that's all men and all women. So the second dimension is Tikkun Olam and how it can be achieved and what are the visions and goals. Third highlight of the book is an offspring of this, and it's one of my two favorite ideas in the whole book, which is that the Torah's vision is that this world will be perfected, but the definition of perfection is filled with life. In the words of Isaiah, God created the world not to be empty, but to be settled, to be filled with population and life. What the Torah is trying to do is recruit humanity, and certainly the Jewish people, to live on the side of life and participate in this process of filling the world with life and upgrading it so it nurtures and sustains life. That's why the title of the book is The Triumph of Life, because believe it or not, what the prophets predict is that before we're done, the world will be repaired, and the measure of that will be a complete triumph of life. And again, it's a sideline. I won't talk about it now, but happy to talk in the question and answer. The rabbis felt so strongly about this that they said not only life will win out and that we will cure all diseases, we'll end all wars and no one will get killed in wars, but the rabbis insisted that when the Messianic age is achieved, we will nullify every death in retrospect, and therefore Tchiyat HaMeitim. Again, I must confess myself. I always told people, I know it's a central teaching of the Jewish tradition. It's in the Shemona Esrei, the main prayer. It's number 2, and that prayer is said 3 times a day in a regular day, 5 times a day on Yom Kippur. But the truth is, I never had a shiur, I never had a rebbe. The first time I heard an Orthodox rabbi speak about Tchiyat HaMeitim, I was 42 years old, and I was the Orthodox rabbi who spoke about it. It was because, again, I came to it in part out of a struggle with the Shoah, trying to understand, which I still, of course, never solved. But when you try to understand it, I kept thinking, what could possibly undo, what could possibly neutralize? And the honest answer is, and anybody here who has lost somebody that you love deeply, you will notice that, nothing can give it back, not Olam Haba, not future world, and not. The only thing that can give him back is that person, that body, not just that soul, that body, that's the only thing that could give back. That's the only thing that really could match what it means to really overcome death. So it's worth thinking about. Again, I say that in part because modern Judaism, including Orthodoxy, are kind of embarrassed by this and never talk about it. So I joke about it. The Reform, who of course are more honest in their theological statements. They simply changed the bracha from Mechaya Metim, who gives life to the dead, or revives the dead, to gives life to everything. The conservative movement doesn't feel they can make that kind of drastic change. So what they did is they left Mechaya Metim, but they translated it, who gives immortal life to the soul. In other words, it's not resurrection, it's soul's immortality. I always joked and said the only way to get away with that is to assume that people don't understand Hebrew so they can get away with that. The third solution, of course, to this challenge is the Orthodox solution, which is you say it so often that no one pays attention, so you don't know what you're saying. So anyway, but the claim behind it is the one I want to stand behind, that Judaism's ultimate dream is literally to defeat death. In the words of Yeshayahu, Bila hamavet lanetzach, death will be swallowed up in eternity. That's our dream. Now, again, if that is a bridge too far, or if you think I've jumped the shark by coming out in favor of overcoming death, so I'm willing to, I make that comment in the book, I'm willing to offer you a compromise deal, which is Yeshayahu, who says death will be swallowed in eternity. In chapter 65, he says, well, here's the fallback position. Nar ben meya shana yamud. When someone dies at 100 years old, they'll say he was just a kid. In other words, we'll have a life extension. We'll have a major life extension, and that will be a way of overcoming death. And if you think about it, 200 years ago, the average life expectancy on Earth was in the upper 30s. It is now the average in the upper 70s. Well, I say if we can two times or 2.25 times life every 200 years, how long will it take to overcome death? Anyway, either way, my point is that's a very serious goal and one that really should be measured. And that brings me to the third, or to the next major point the book tries to make. What does it mean to say that life is going to win? The answer is, the Torah asks, actually it's a covenant with all humanity, but we Jews see ourselves as a kind of a lead partner, as a kind of a role model, or to teach, because it's not a simple and obvious idea. The idea is that you should live on the side of life. Live your life on the side of life. Now, what does that mean to live on the side of life? So the answer is, as a collective, the answer is obvious. You create a society which treasures life, which makes medical help available to everybody, which gives justice so people don't have to worry, which tries to correct driving so that you don't have a lot of road deaths. In other words, as a society, we can work to support and expand life. But then there's the individual life. And I think, again, it's one of the more important issues in the whole book. The answer is, you live on the side of life means as follows. Every action you take in life, whatever action it is, every action you take, just don't do it. Stop, assess it, and reshape it to maximize life or to minimize death, because every moment and every action of life is a choice of life and death. Maimonides, Rambam points out in the guide, Moshe's summary of the Torah, which we'll read in about 3 weeks' time. Re'ei nasati lefanecha hayom, I put before you today, et ha'chaim ve'et ha'tov, et ha'mavet ve'et ha'ra. I put before you chaim and tov, life and good, mavet and ra, death and evil, and then he continues, uvacharta b'chaim, you should choose life. Now, what's very striking about that is, so number one is we don't think mentally that every moment, every gesture is a choice, but it is. And even more important, says Maimonides, if you look at what Moses just said, he said is life and good are the same thing. They're in opposition. And death and evil. So Maimonides simply says every good action, every mitzvah has some element of affirming life or choosing life or minimizing death. And every evil act, every wrong behavior is in some way a choice of choosing death. So let me apply it as a simple example. Eating. Every life action, but we'll start with eating. Now, if you don't eat, you'll die. So eating is obviously a choice of life. But can you maximize the life and minimize death in it? Well, the answer, I'll start with kashrut. Here's a ritual that tries to help you do that. What does it say? It says when you eat, ideally you should be a vegetarian. That's what kashrut is really all about. It's about being a vegetarian. In the Garden of Eden, we're vegetarians, and according to Isaiah, at the end of days, we'll all be vegetarians again, including, he argues, even lions and predator animals will become vegetarians. As I tell people, enjoy the steak before Mashiach comes. But anyway, to come back to the main point, you should be a vegetarian. But kashrut says we're living in a world which is imperfect. And in a world which is imperfect, you can compromise with the principle to get there one step at a time. So what's the compromise? We eat meat with restrictions. All the kashrut restrictions are about meat. Because what it really says is that when you prepared your food, you shouldn't have prepared food that keeps you alive by killing another animal. But if you already do that, let's minimize death and maximize life there. How do you do that? Well, one is very few species are permitted to eat. Very few. And the ones that are permitted to eat, they're animals that chew the cud, which is another way of saying they're herbivorous. They're not killers, they're not carnivorous. No kosher animal is carnivorous or predator. So again, when you actually eat, you don't eat blood. According to the Torah, all humans, not just Jews, shouldn't eat blood, because that's a statement of reverence for life, that even if we take it, we don't really own it. And so we acknowledge that we don't take the blood as a symbol of the carry of life. And if that wasn't enough, meat and milk. So the answer is, milk is the source of life. Meat is a symbol of a killed animal. So you never mix the two. They're opposition. So again, here's a ritual way. Now, what would be an ethical way of eating, maximize life and minimize that? Well, how about no sugar, no fat, no highly processed food? Seriously. It means eat healthy. One can, or give another example, eco-kosher. I won't eat fish, even if it's kosher, if it's an overfished species, because my act of eating should be a choice of life that minimizes death. So that's eating, but one could go through literally every life activity. How about speaking? So how about speaking? So the answer is the next word I say can be a word of respect for your value, for your dignity, for your equality. It can be a word of encouragement to live, to choose, to risk, to take, to do, right? Or a word of love to make you feel that you really are infinitely valuable. Or it can be a word of derogation, it can be a word of mockery, a word of slamming people, driving them down. We're a stereotype that denies their equality. In short, so the Torah says you have to measure every word you say so that the next word of choosing life, not of choosing death. And one can go through, there are lots of cases and then you'll look at it. I'll throw one last case in because it's something we all live with every day. How about transportation? How do you maximize life and minimize death? What would be the answer? So the answer is reduce your carbon footprint. So if you take mass transit, that's choosing maximizing life compared to a car. And if you have a car, an electric car is less polluting than a fossil fuel car. And one could go on and on. So literally, there is no activity in life. Of course, also how you drive. You can drive recklessly and endanger people, or you can drive in a way that's... So my point only is, literally, every action of life, that's what the halakha is. In my book, I argue that halakha is not a legal system, a set of commandments. It's covenantal actions. It's look at every action you take and reshape them to make sure they're on the side of life, to make sure they're on the side of human dignity and equal value. And that is what it's trying to do. And one of the problems of the misunderstanding of it is you get people who therefore take a halakha and say the precedent is so strong that you can't modify it so women can't really play a more equal role in the synagogue, or can't play a more equal role. Of course, until 50 years ago, until Blue Greenberg, they weren't allowed to learn either, so they couldn't make the claim, how about I can learn everything and become a rabbi? So again, the answer is, that's what it means to understand that the tradition has a dynamic and a goal, and that therefore part of maximizing life is to say that today we can do things that we couldn't do before. In the book, I'll throw it out, you can come back to it later. I try to apply this principle to LGBT also, which is the same set of issues in my judgment. So the third principle is literally choosing life in everything you do, and it's a major opportunity and challenge to create a community that helps people see how you maximize life and to help them actually maximize in the choice itself. Fourth point, it's a utopian universal vision. All humanity, the whole earth will be perfected. And as I said, overcome war, overcome death, equality. I mean, these are amazing, incredible, and maybe almost impossible goals. But you know what? In the last 200 years, we have had more movements to accomplish this very goal of perfecting life than ever before in human history. But if you look at the list, of course it includes democracy and liberalism, but if you look at the list, what do you see? Communism, Stalinism, Nazism. It was really a movement to perfect the world. National socialism, socialism to overcome poverty, to overcome the inequalities and the capitalist depressions that impoverish people. National, because unlike the Bolsheviks, we're not going to simply have one class fight another. It's one nation, one unified community will achieve this equality. And finally, eugenics will eliminate inferior forms of life so the human life will be perfected. So Nazism was a great movement to perfect the world. The only catch was, in order to do that, they said, well, you have to, A, eliminate all the defectives, disabilities, and B, get rid of all the Jews. And one could go on and on. Maoism, Communist China, Khmer Rouge. All these movements had in common a dream of making the world perfect. So what went wrong? My point is, because in the end, the dream and the ideal was so strong that they said, the people are the problem. Anybody who gets in my way is trying to stop perfecting the world. So what you have to do is put them in concentration camps, or kill them, or override them. So what happened is that the ideal, how about today we're living through it as Jews? The anti-colonial, post-colonial ideology says that if you're a colonist, you don't deserve to live, because of the ideal is to achieve human dignity, and the only way you can do that is to literally wipe out the colonialists. And of course, this is the justification for Hamas murdering and raping, because they're resisting colonialism. What Judaism said is, if you have an ideal, the method of delivering the ideal must respect humans, and it must be limited. So it's not universal, it's particular. It's one people, one religion at a time. It's not universal, we're going to get there no matter what, but it's no coercion, respect your enemy, your disagreement, and you'll have to compromise, yes. So it's one step at a time. And again, I don't make this sound like it's the perfect solution. One step at a time. That means that women's lives still are not worth as much as men's. In Eastern Asia, hundreds of millions of women die from childhood because they don't get the medical attention and the education and so on that boys do. Or in the case of the Haredi community, women have a higher death rate of cancer, breast cancer, because women are not as important and you don't check them out as quickly and you don't make the same medical effort. So again, so these are not just theoretical questions. These are concrete, actual, living challenges, but I come back to the main point, that the method one step at a time, nevertheless is less out of control, less goes wrong. And so Judaism's office to the world is that you have to match your dreams of equality, of overcoming poverty, with a method that respects humans, that's willing to go one step at a time, and that's willing to give up coercion in favor of a persuasion and education. Last example of I'd like to throw out is in the book I claim is this idea of brit, covenant, partnership between God and humanity. First of all, it's not just between God and human beings. Since no one person can do it, as I said before, it's between the generations. But here's my second and I think most important claim in the book. The brit was not a one-time. This covenant that you and I joined to was not given one time at Sinai, and from then on we live that way. Rather, it has gone through two, actually I believe, in the middle of a third iteration. The first iteration is Biblical Judaism. In this brit of the Bible, God is the dominant partner, very controlling of history. And God takes care of everything if you take care of God, right? The Shema. If you obey the laws of God and serve Him properly, it will rain. If you don't observe, it will not rain. Now, Maimonides, and in fact, other medieval philosophers pointed out that it doesn't work that way anymore. But then my answer is, in the first phase, it's totally divine, and you have to serve God properly. That's the only thing you have to do. In the story of Shoftim, the book of Shoftim, Midian oppresses the Jews. God calls Gideon to liberate the Jews. Because the Jews do tshuva, God sends them a liberator. He rounds up an army of several thousand, and the voice of God tells him, send home. He sends home to get us down to a few hundred people. Why? Because if a few thousand won the battle, people would think that it was you and the people who did it. They have to understand that God is doing everything. So he sends home everybody but a handful in order to show that if they win, and they do win, it's all God's doing. This God is so controlling that God also sends oppressors to oppress us. God destroys the second Beit HaMikdash by sending the Babylonians when we don't live up to the Torah. This God sends a prophet. If you're not sure what to do, the prophet sends you God sends you a prophet to tell you exactly what to do now. And by the way, two prophets can never disagree. One of them is a liar. Because God gives unqualified and single instruction. The rabbis came along and said, this brit, based on God's partnership, has been reissued or reoffered, been transformed. The rabbis had the problem that we all have. How come the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed? Second Beit HaMikdash, they didn't do idolatry, in a very famous Talmudic statement. They were full of mitzvahs and good deeds because of baseless hatred. But what does that mean? What the rabbis try to say is that God self-limited again. And this time God said, your behavior, human behavior, will make the difference. It's not just how you satisfy God, it's how you run your policies. So if you look at the Talmudic story of the destruction, it's because one Jew persecuted another Bar Kamsa, and the rabbis didn't do anything about it. It's because people, the zealots, rebelled against the world's greatest power recklessly, not stopping to ask like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai eventually did. Maybe you can negotiate a diplomacy. So, but how do you understand that they were revolting for God? How come they lost? Why didn't God split the Mediterranean and drown the Romans? The rabbis answered, because God has self-limited to call the humans to greater responsibility in this behavior. So I have Torah Shemal Peh, where much of the written tradition is interpreted, and in some cases moved forward, in other cases improved, in other cases shut down, because humans, as the partner, have a much more important role to play. Now, I'm arguing we're living through the third iteration. Looking back now, we see there's Biblical Judaism, and there was Rabbinic Judaism. What we're living through, I believe, is the third iteration. It started in modernity, in which God becomes totally hidden, unlike the Rabbinic tradition where God becomes more hidden You don't see visible miracles anymore. You have hidden miracles. And God doesn't do it all. When God does it, it does it in partnership. Purim is the rabbi's Pesach, because God delivers the Jews, but they wouldn't have been delivered if Mordechai and Esther hadn't done their homework and hadn't initiated this whole plot. We're living in the third phase. What's the third phase like? God is totally hidden. And again, I think we're living as religious Jews in this world. I don't see, at least on the surface, where God is. We'll make it more dramatic. Take the Shoah. In the Holocaust, I don't see where the religious Jews were saved because they were faithful or because God answered their prayers. So how do you account for this? So my answer is very obvious. It's nothing to do. It's the fact already announced hundreds of years earlier that we reached the third phase in which God is present, God is close to us, God will share our lives, God will share our suffering, God will share our pain, God will share our joy. God will inspire, God will relate, God will guide, but it's complete human responsibility. In this phase, there are more miracles than ever before in history, but they're done only through human agents. So with all due respect, to go to the Rebbe to get a bracha when you're not pregnant or whatever, I don't see any statistical evidence that the Rebbe's brachas work nearly as well as IVF. And one could go on and on these issues. In other words, where a mature, responsible religious person understands that God works miracles through human agents and natural law, which means if a doctor studies the properties of this particular chemical and discovers that it can kill lymphoma, or it discovers this particular enzyme that can lower your cholesterol, and so on, that is the way God is operating to cure disease and to strengthen life. So this, living in this third phase, means that humans have full responsibility, but then they have to take power and exercise that responsibility responsibly. And that's the great challenge of the third era. It's a challenge we have in Israel. How do we develop our strength strong enough to protect ourselves, but not so strong that we abuse those who are weaker? How do we make room for the dignity of Arabs in a democracy? How do we make room for the Palestinians if we can, if they're willing to live with us in peace? These are the challenges of the third era and of the third stage of covenant. And the most important thing about it is, in the first phase, the limited leadership was genetic priests and designated prophets. In the second stage, there was a major expansion, namely rabbis. You didn't have to be born or chosen by God. You could become eligible by study, by teaching, by development. Now in the third phase, I argue, it's even more expanded and more established. How? Well, one possibility is now men and women, and not just men, can be teachers of Torah or religious authorities, or I'll give you a whole long list of other things to do. So we are living in the third stage. It's a major challenge. Why? Because when God is more hidden, it means the holiness is in the secular realm. And how do you meet God in the secular realm? Well, that's how do you? The answer is if you're a businessman, it's learning that your workers are Tzelem Elohim and creating a workplace and a business place that treats them with the dignity and their capacity. Developing a system where the workers' dignity is expressed in their work. And one could go on and on. And then, but that, in other words, when you meet the image of God, that's in the hiddenness of that is where you'll meet God, or at least in our lifetime, in our particular situation. So the third era is unfinished, and unlike the second and the first, in a way, reward is much less, if not insignificant, much less significant. In the first phase, everything is reward and punishment. In the second rabbinic phase, the rabbi said, well, on this world, you're not going to get reward and punishment. But in the future world, as you'll get reward and punishment. But in the third phase, reward doesn't play a significant, even for Orthodox Jews, the reward of world to come is much less significant. what really works in this world is relationship to God, a love that says, I want to be part of your partnership, a sense of presence, of your presence in my life gives me strength and gives me inspiration, and a love of your fellow human beings. That makes me want to make the world better for them. That makes me want to treasure their life. And this becomes the opportunity and the challenge. How do you develop power and at the same time not lose, but rather develop the restraints and the relationships that make the power for life and for dignity and not for abuse. So those are 5 of the main points. And I'll finish only by saying one of the comment about why I wrote the book too. Because in my judgment, in Israel we feel it more than even in America. We're embattled. Again, we have to fight for our very existence. It means sacrificing our children, our lives, for protecting the Jewish people. It's a tremendous strain. And of course, there are setbacks and tragedies, and that makes it even more difficult. And there are problems of leadership, and that makes it even more difficult. So how do you respond to this? So my answer again is, this is where it comes down. The religion could be such a major resource to tell us you are in this partnership. This partnership has had ups and downs in the past. We've had disasters in the past. Take the Shoah. We came right back, chose life again, renewed life, and it's Israel, the greatest outburst of life in our history. So if we go through a bad phase, to give us the hope and understanding that this is an unfinished journey, and we have the ability to overcome, to choose life again, and to do these things again. So this is our challenge at this particular moment, to understand the moment, to draw, but what's the tradition doing for us right now? Well, right now, the official rabbinate claims that religion means that you're exempt from serving in the army. That if you learn Torah, you don't have to risk your life. That if you are a religious scholar or religious community, you get privileges, but you don't give those equal privileges to other people. So in short, the religion, instead of being a source of inspiration and strength to go through one of the great challenging period of our history, it's a force, almost, I hate to say it, almost for evil, right? It's a force that encourages discrimination against Arabs. It's a force that disproportionately supports anti-peace and very unwilling to either take risks or not take responsible actions for peace. So I wrote this book in part because I think it's crucial, and in particular people who embrace the whole tradition, who are willing to live by it as best they can, to assert themselves and to restore the fact that this is a dynamic covenant, that it brings all these traditions, and these traditions are meant to strengthen us in our commitment to life. But most of all, it gives us the challenge and the inspiration, and yes, the command or the call to choose life, to work for life, to exercise that power to the maximum limit. So I really hope this book will help other people come forward and say, this is the tradition as it should be lived in this moment. It's the heroic age of the Jewish people, not just physically and putting our lives on the line, but it's the heroic age of choosing life and pushing to the next level of messianic redemption, of the next level of overcoming poverty and hunger, war and sickness. So I offer it, and I'm very grateful to you for being serious enough about it, to give it out, but more important, I hope to apply it and to represent it in your daily life. Thank you.